equipping effective advocates for family stability and love, both at home and in the public square. You can be better informed, more motivated, and more effective. Subscribe to our fact-filled newsletter, participate in our book clubs, attend a workshop, and of course, you're tuned into our podcasts. Dr. J is a guest of Father Robert McTeigue on The Station of the Crosses, The Catholic Current. They're discussing the fallout and the underpinning ideologies of the sexual revolution.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTeigue of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our topic today is the fallout from the sexual revolution, and our guest is Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, who is the founder of the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit organization that defends the family at home and in the public square. She is a prolific author. Her most recent book is called The Sexual State: How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church Was Right All Along. Dr. Morse, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you so much for having me on, Father. I'm excited about this.
Dr. Morse, I want to begin with a couple of short phrases from your most recent book, and I want to describe those words as fighting words that would likely get you and me banned from social media and might cause a stampede or a fire alarm on your average college campus. The short phrases are these.
Go ahead.
Sex makes babies. Life begins at conception. People are born male or female. Marriage is for life. Divorce is not something to be celebrated. Homosexual acts go against nature. Why would these phrases get us in trouble? Are you and I both haters, or is something else going on?
Oh, Father, I should have warned you before you brought me on the program. I'm a certified hater, you know. I'm actually on the list. I've been listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center hate group list, you know.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, indeed, the things that you have listed there are the reason I'm considered hateful. And what all of those things have in common is that they are all true statements that go against the modern ideology, which I call a fantasy ideology, really, of the sexual revolution. And the sexual revolution is a set of interlocking ideologies. You could almost call them superstitions, because they're things we believe in spite of the facts, because we like it the way it makes us feel. You know, if you like the way it makes you feel and you hang on, that's kind of a definition of a superstition. So yes, you picked out the great phrases that are contraindicated by the sexual revolution.
Well, you know, the irony is that those obvious statements that we just described is that they're biologically obvious. Certainly economics and social science has recorded the truths of them for generations. And as a philosopher and a theologian, what interests me is that it's not only in harmony with natural law, it's what the Church has always taught. And yet, these words, which I agree with fully, and I imagine most of our listeners would as well, they're the minority position. Why is that?
Well, what the sexual revolution has done is to captivate the imaginations of people who are not grounded in any kind of transcendent faith. And Chesterton once said, "If you don't believe in God, it doesn't mean you don't believe anything. It means you will believe anything."
Right.
You know, and so people who are kind of ungrounded find it appealing to think that we can have sex on our own terms without anything bad ever happening, and that we can somehow create a whole society around the idea that sex is a harmless recreational activity. And so that's what people have set out to do, and that's what they have been doing. And you might think that if you point out that this is irrational, that would be the end of it. People say, "Oh, you're right. You know, how silly of me." Why
I know better than that.
That's
I
right.
have
but
taught.
see,
I have taught medical ethics to undergraduates, and if you want to ruin their weekend, tell them that latex doesn't work like a magic talisman, and tell them that taking the oral contraceptives is more significant than taking Tic Tac. And oh my goodness, the hateful glances, the ocular daggers that were thrown my way over the years. So I know very well that you're raining on a big, big parade that a lot of people have invested a whole lot in, because the holy grail of the modern world is that we can have sex without consequence. And if you say anything to the contrary, it's time to shoot the messenger.
That's right. That's right.
I think this is the circumstances that we're in.
Right. But you might think that if you show that it's irrational and crazy and untrue, that you would be done with the argument, because normally in philosophy, if you prove something's untrue, then okay, you win.
That's what it says in the handbook.
Right. Did they give you a handbook when you did your doctorate in philosophy? Wow. We didn't get that in economics. But the thing that was the biggest revelation to me, Father, as I've been talking about these issues for a long time now, figuring out that it's irrational doesn't change anybody's mind. What it does is it just ratchets up the need for more force and more propaganda. So if you think it's about truth, then that's one thing. But if it's really all about power, if it's really all about getting more and more power, then the fact that you're preaching something untrue is actually fine. That's just fine, because trying to do the impossible requires more force and more power and more propaganda, And I think that's the key to understanding the whole thing. That's the key to showing you why we're just flooded all the time with propaganda. It's like, oh my God, another fake
and
study.
Lots of craziness. And, I would warn my students against what I call the rationalist fallacy. And the rationalist fallacy goes like this. If only I explain myself clearly enough, people will understand and agree with me. And I tell my students that's a trail of tears. It never works that way. And trying to tell the truth that sex always has consequences, and no one ever becomes unpregnant. You might be post-pregnant, but not unpregnant. Those very hard truths, which are actually the truths of civilization, you responded to like you shot Santa Claus and canceled Halloween. Mm-hmm. And now that superstition, as you said.
I think it's very interesting to pause a moment and see why the ordinary person is so immune to the truth. Why the rationalist fallacy? Why that rational? What you're calling the rationalist fallacy? Why it doesn't work? What do you tell the students about why it's a trail of tears? Why it doesn't work? What do you tell them?
Well, the reason that it doesn't work is because that we're more than just rational. And sometimes we want things that are not good for us, and we want them anyway. And what's the morality of the 2-year-old? I want what I want when I want it. Now, give somebody like that tenure or a badge and a gun and a bureaucrat behind them, and there's going to be tremendous mischief effected. Yes, and what happens when a 2-year-old is denied, no, don't touch the hot stove? The child has a meltdown. But now the child is in charge of a university or a federal department.
Right, that's right. And I often observe people who I believe are being driven by a guilty conscience. In other words, they know they've done it. I think, a lot of times people know that they've done something they shouldn't be doing, and they know there are negative consequences to it, but they can't stop. And because there's an addictive quality to sex, and I think most adults know that there's an addictive quality to it. But what that means is if you feel you can't stop, you don't want to admit that it's wrong. And so the person who reminds you that it's wrong becomes the problem, rather than the stream of negative consequences that have flowed automatically from what you've done, and what you're continuing to do.
Well, one of my dearest and oldest Jesuit friends is fond of saying, a guilty conscience needs no accuser. Herod knew that he was doing wrong even before John the Baptist showed up, and John the Baptist just poured salt on that wound, and it was meant to be a healing balm. So, in your experience, I mean, you've been in academia, you've done a lot of speaking. What happens when you drop these truth bombs on people? You obviously don't get a lot of Christmas cards, I'm assuming.
Oh, I have my fan base, Father.
Oh, good.
I have my fans, right. But I have enemies too. Well, one technique that I developed during the years when I was debating the definition of marriage, the proper definition of marriage, and I would be called to law schools to debate gay marriage. And so I would go in there, and what I learned to do was to go about it by indirect. And what I mean by that is I would start by saying, we're here to discuss the proper definition of marriage. And I would just remind you, we redefined marriage once already, back in the late 60s when we removed the presumption that marriage would be permanent. That presumption of permanence was removed from the law, and so no-fault divorce became the law of the land. And we had these people saying, gee, how is my divorce going to affect your marriage? Gosh, we have studies showing the kids will be fine. Only a few people are going to get divorced. I mean, what difference can it make if we make it cheaper for them and so on? All these kind of arguments. And then I would look at the students. By this time, they're all squirming in their seats. They're all squirming. And then I would drop the bomb, and I would say every single one of those things turned out to be untrue. And that the reason the students are squirming is because most of them many of them, half of them probably, have been through divorce already. They've been through their parents' divorce, and they know it was a lie that the kids would be fine. They know that's a lie. So now I've got their wheels grinding a little bit, Instead of looking at me as like, oh, there's that horrible woman, let's put on our love, our love, love wins all kind of T-shirt or whatever. And I literally, I walked into a law school one time where everybody was wearing pro-gay T-shirts that matched, in the law school. So anyway,
and you had a license plate that says "Hate Rules." Our topic today is the fallout of the sexual revolution. Our guest is Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder of the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit organization that defends family. And her most recent book is The Sexual State, How Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church Was Right All Along. We started out talking about how what the church has always taught about human life and sexuality and relationships, which has been confirmed by science, both the hard sciences and the social sciences, has been redefined as hate speech. In this segment, we're going to look at what are the dark roots and the bitter fruits of the sexual revolution. Dr. Morse, in the last segment, you were relating how you made law school students squirm because so many of them had been through divorce. How is divorce one of the more obvious and bitter fruits of the sexual revolution, and can you trace the fruits back to the roots?
Well, I define the sexual revolution as having three interlocking ideologies, and the divorce ideology is certainly one of them. Okay, so the divorce ideology is basically saying to everyone that you can have sex and childbearing without having marriage. And as a matter of fact, a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate sex and childbearing from marriage. So you can have a baby without being married, you can have sex without being married, so on and so forth. Now, the underlying message of that, which people very seldom will just blurt out like this, the underlying message is that kids are so resilient that we can do anything we want. Adults can do anything they want, and the kids will be fine, And really what we're saying is that adults have an unlimited entitlement to the sex lives that they want, and kids just have to accept whatever the adults choose to give them. That's really what we're saying, but we'd be embarrassed if we just blurted it out like that,
But no wonder you're such a killjoy. My goodness.
Well, but you know what? See, here's the thing. If you can enlist the people who have been already harmed by the sexual revolution, they're not easily talked out of it. I deal with a lot of adult children of divorce, and Father, they are so grateful to have somebody talk to them. They are so grateful to hear somebody say, yes, this was wrong. What happened to you was wrong, and it shouldn't have happened. And that's all they want. That's all they want. But every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every big major life event, they still have to go back and renegotiate with their mother and their father and their mother's new boyfriend and their father's new girlfriend.
I've seen that
who's going to attend? As soon as we name it, everybody recognizes it.
Yes.
But
Dr. Morse, we have a caller. We have a caller on the line who may be confirming your point. Joe from Boston, welcome to the Catholic Current. What's your question today?
Right. I'd like to ask the doctor, in the 70s, I certainly participated in the sexual revolution, and a lot of my friends did. I went to Catholic school, so I'm sitting here saying, what was missing in the schooling that made me feel it's fine to do all that? Later in life, as I get older, I realized it was an empty, hollow pursuit, and then later I really, confession, repented to the sins of my youth, and really understood the hurt I had caused to a lot of women. So what is the church doing today? First, I think the guys at the top were asleep when I went through Catholic education. They didn't. I'm not sure why so many people in the church hierarchy didn't see this coming. So I'm wondering now if they're still sleeping and what's being done to prevent young men from going down the track that I went down.
Thank you very much for your call, Joe. Dr. Morse, do you have a response?
Well, I have a response that could take us all day to go through. I mean, your story, sir, first of all, thank you for your courageous witness here and calling and, revealing to however many millions of people are listening to this program that you participated and that you have repented of it. I'm telling you, there are a lot of people like us, right? Because I did too. I will say I was a full participant in the sexual revolution. And there's so many things I could comment on what you said. The one thing I want to mention is that you don't realize that it's a dead end. You don't realize that until you have made mistakes that are almost irrevocable, right? If somebody gets pregnant, a divorce happens, you get some serious illness. It takes something very big in your life before you go, holy cow, they didn't tell me this. They didn't tell me the whole story here, And
it was not in the brochure.
Big problem. No, It was not in the write-up, So I commend you for bringing that up. And you are exactly the kind of guy that I want to go to the Ruth Institute website and look at our material on the survivors of the sexual revolution, because you are the kind of guy who needs to be telling your story. You need to be telling the truth so that you keep the younger kids from going down the path. Now, as to what was going on in the church, and what is going on in the church, I think the recent revelations of clergy sex abuse explains a lot. Let's put it that way. It explains a lot. I asked myself many times after I figured out, hey, the church was, I should have done what the sisters told me back in 8th grade. I would have been way better off if I had. But no, I was too smart, and I left the church and all of that. And when I came back and worked out that, hey, they were right all along, and I'm jumping up and down. I'm so excited to be telling everybody, hey, social science confirms what the church has been teaching, common sense, everything, it works. And yet you get this dead air, this dead silence. Nobody wants to talk about it. The clergy sex abuse stuff tells us what was going on. We've got a lot of men in the clergy who are themselves morally compromised. And so they're not going to talk about it. They're not going to touch it. And even some of the ones who are clean, who do not have guilty consciences, oftentimes they're under the thumb of a superior who's holding them back in some way. I mean, so all of these kinds of stories are beginning to come out. And exactly when it all started in the church, such that you had the experience you had in the 70s, I'm not sure about that. I couldn't really put my finger on exactly when that started. That the church itself in the Catholic schools.
I'll go out on a limb and say that the popular rejection of Humanae Vitae didn't help. Dr. Morse, in your book, you talked about 3 ideologies fomenting and driving the sexual revolution. You talked about the contraceptive ideology, the divorce ideology, and the gender ideology. Can you give us a summary of what those are about? Yes, and I will say the book has a section on each one of these ideologies, and at the Ruth Institute Institute podcast, we have 45-minute talks on each one of these ideologies. So if people want more information, there's plenty more. But briefly, the contraceptive ideology is the idea that a good society should do everything possible to separate sex and babies. Sex and babies, that's the connection we got to break. Okay, so that's the contraceptive ideology. And to my mind, that's more important even than the pill itself. Because everybody says the pill changed everything. The pill didn't really change anything. The peasants of France knew how to reduce their fertility, okay? They reduced their fertility by half in the 18th century, okay? And they did it without the pill, Right.
So it's the ideology that is really new, the idea that sex without babies is an entitlement. See, that's what was ushered in, kind of hidden behind the pill, was this whole ideology. So that's the first one, contraceptive ideology. And the second one is the divorce ideology, which I've already mentioned, which says that sex and babies can both be separated from marriage, and the kids will be just fine. And if you're a kid and you're not fine, we'll take you to the doctor and put you on medication because you're the problem, not your parents and their divorce and their new love lives. That's not the problem. You're the problem. So that's the divorce ideology. And then the third one is the gender ideology, which claims that male and female are not really very significant. The body, the sex of the body, is not particularly significant. So back in the day, in the 70s, when I was a young woman going through college and whatnot, feminism was the idea that men and women are identical, except women are better. That was what we were all brought up with.
And equality demands that we admit that, yes.
That's right. And now we've kind of, the whole process has kind of morphed and kind of moved along, right? The denial of the body has moved along to the point where we're saying, well, we used to say the gender and sex and all that stuff was just socially constructed, so we can reconstruct it if we want to and make everybody equal. Well, now we're saying the individual person can reconstruct themselves in accordance with whatever they want to do. But in both cases, you're saying that the body's not significant. See? And so that's one of the very old heresies that Christianity has had to deal with, which is the Gnostic heresy. And, St. Thomas had to deal with it, St. Augustine had to deal with it, and here it is, it's cropped up in this kind of new, modern, technological form.
It is a perennial error, and good philosophers and Catholic theologians have been fighting against it since the get-go. And what keeps me up at night is the fact that this error has now attained legal status. So far, we've talked about the nature of the sexual revolution, how it was built on the ideologies of contraception, divorce, and gender ideology. In this segment, we're going to look at the role of the state in promoting and benefiting from the sexual revolution. Dr. Morse, you've already been identified as an official hater. I want to ask you if you're also officially a conspiracy theorist. Paraphrasing your book, your contention is that the sexual revolution didn't just happen as a social phenomenon. Rather, it was engineered by cultural elites, enabled and underwritten by the state, codified into law, and accepted as normative in the culture as a deliberate matter of course. Is that a statement you stand by?
I sure do. I absolutely stand by that.
Tell us more, please.
Well, and I don't think it doesn't make you a conspiracy theorist if you notice that everybody who has the same incentives behaves the same way. They don't have to be sitting together huddling to make a plot, plotting and scheming to make something happen. If they all have the same incentives, they're all going to do the same sort of thing. And what we have done is reconstruct society so that the sexual state is self-sustaining, So today, I'll just say this one thing, and then we'll go back to the history a little bit. Today, I just want everybody to notice that the entry into the professions, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a PhD or have an MBA, any of those type of things, the price of entry is to delay childbearing. And that's true whether you're a man or a woman. You got to put off starting a family until you're like 30 or something, you know. And so what that means is that the professions and the higher end of the society is dominated by people who have most likely participated in the contraceptive abortion ideology in some way, right? Because they aren't all living chaste lives until they're 30. You know, they've probably contracepted, maybe have an abortion or two. And so that means your newscaster is going to freak out over the March for Life, and she's not going to want to cover it. And the kind of person who is pro-life and who does start her family at 22 or whatever, she's not going to rise to the top of the professions, most likely. You know, the system is stacked to reward delayed childbearing. And so now the thing keeps going. It keeps chugging along because you can't even get informed properly to understand what we're all dealing with, you know. But to go back to the earlier question, how did the state and how did cultural elites make this happen? Let's just start with the contraceptive ideology, because that is most interesting reading the history of that, and I have quite a bit of it in the book. What led up to Roe versus Wade and what led up to Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965, that court case is, I think most people would agree, that's the really important court case that said no state may regulate in any way any form of contraception. So many interesting things about that, but the one I want to emphasize here is that it was a handful of, I would call them Connecticut society ladies, who wanted this and who were part of the organization that was the forerunner of Planned Parenthood of Connecticut. And their chief opponent was the Catholic Church, and it was the Catholic Church in Connecticut of immigrants, of, you know, Italians and kind of poor people who worked in plants and worked in the trades and things like that. The Catholic Church was the immigrant church, and so what happened? That Griswold versus Connecticut was decided by the Supreme Court in 1965. For the previous 30 years, that little group of Connecticut society ladies had gone to the legislature saying we need to overturn these anti-contraception laws, and every year they would lose. Every year.
And I imagine that was by a legislature. They were rejected by a legislature that was probably predominantly Protestant.
Well, there were quite a few Catholic legislators in there at that time. But yes, there were Catholic constituents and people sort of understood. We want to put the brakes on people's sexual activity. This is going to lead to people sounded like Paul VI. This is going to lead to immoral behavior and a lowering of standards and so on and so forth. And they said year after year, they would say, oh, no, all we want to do is remove the restrictions on contraception for married couples who have serious health problems.
All we want, as soon as they start with that, I know that no good is going to follow. Well, we just want this one small thing.
That's it. And in
that's
that
how
chapter
it starts.
Of the book, I actually kind of lay that out, so that people can see that they've been running this con on us for a long time. So we are perfectly within our rights to say we don't believe you. Right. You're not acting in a good. When you say all you want is this one little insignificant small thing, and who could possibly be against it? You're not acting in good faith. You're trying to con us. You've got more in mind that you want besides that. And indeed, the day that Griswold versus Connecticut was decided, the attorneys were on the phone to each other, and there's a documentary record of people saying, "Yeah, we had this conversation. It's time for us to work on abortion. We can, we got contraception legalized. Well, let's work on abortion now." Even though they had stood there in the courtroom and essentially perjured themselves, saying that, no, that's not what we want. You know what I mean? So it's really, that just opens your eyes to what.
And something similar is afoot with euthanasia. Death with dignity will inevitably become a duty to die that other people will have to finance at gunpoint. What's the appeal for the state bureaucrat, the department chief, the administrator to the sexual revolution? Why is he eager to support it?
Well, there are a couple of layers of that question. Back in the day, in the 60s, there were people promoting the contraceptive ideology in the following sense through the government. They were saying, we have now the Great Society, the great new welfare programs, and golly, we have to do something about all those illegitimate babies. So what we're going to do about all those illegitimate babies is pump contraception into the poor neighborhoods. That's how we're going to solve it. And, of course, that just broke the family down even further, right, because it took the brakes off of people's sexual activity, and they had even more out-of-wedlock pregnancies. And they're sitting there scratching their heads like, how could this happen? Wait, we gave them all the stuff. What is wrong here? And so now we're up to 40% out-of-wedlock childbearing. 70% of poor people babies born to poor people are born out of wedlock. It's like they pretend to not get it. But what is happening is that the state is replacing the family. And whether the people in 1965 knew that consciously, I'm not going to sit here and tell you LBJ wanted that when he put in the Great Society. I don't know that he wanted that. I'm not going to say that. But that is the consequence. The consequence is that the state is taking over the role of the family, particularly the role of the father, the role to protect and provide for the family.
Yes,
and
Uncle
that
Sam
has enormous consequences.
Right, Uncle Sam has become the sugar daddy, telling women, you don't have to exercise modesty or self-control because if something goes wrong, Uncle Sam will pay the bills. And then Uncle Sam tells young men, you don't have to be responsible or exercise self-control. If something goes wrong, we'll cover for you. Dr. Morse, we have a caller on the line now. We have Steve from Buffalo, New York. Steve, welcome to the Catholic Current. What's your question?
Hi, thank you very much. Actually, I just tuned in the last 5 minutes, and I heard your guest there, talking about how entry into the professions, of course, it requires lengthy education and postponing the family. And getting back to the sexual revolution, I'm wondering what the role of wealth and affluence played in that, because it seems like this, to me, in general, the sexual revolution doesn't really happen unless you have a fairly affluent society. We experienced the post-war boom, and then you have all these kids who are able to go to college now, and there's this, and I guess maybe extended adolescence kind of begins there. It's a curious situation because we think of education as a good. We think of it as improving the world, and we think wealth improves the world. So I just wonder what your guest has to say about that, if she understands where I'm going with this.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Steve. Dr. Morse, your response?
Well, there are a couple of things going on because the things are affecting each other, going kind of in both directions. But the way I would characterize it is this, that the baby boom generation, when they decided that they could have sex without babies, they basically started consuming the wealth around them. Rather than creating wealth for the next generation, everything became focused on the self. And the sexual act itself is a metaphor, or maybe a template is a better word. The sexual act itself became a consumer good, or a recreational activity, rather than a community building, family building. This is how we make new babies. This is how we bond mom and dad. A community, other-focused act. And that became kind of the template for how people viewed themselves in relation to the world and everything else. So yes, we have college education, we have more wealth, and we spend it on ourselves. We didn't spend it on schools for children. We didn't spend it on delaying our benefits because we're going to spend our peak earning years helping those kids develop. We're going to invest in them. That's not exactly what we did.
Well, no, it was worse than that. Because the boomers ran up the federal credit card to such a radical extreme that they mortgaged the future of the children they didn't have. I mean, American children are being born into debt peonage right now, and I don't see how that's going to work out well. Our topic today is fallout from the sexual revolution. Our guest is Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder of the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit dedicated to the defense of family. Her most recent book is The Sexual State, How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church Was Right All Along. So far, we've talked about the sexual revolution rooted in a contraceptive ideology, a divorce ideology, and a gender ideology, and why that revolution was appealing to the power of the state to clean up the mess it would inevitably make. In this segment, we're going to look at the idea that we can transition from the sexual state and that we can move on to a civilization of love. You know, Dr. Morse, we began the show talking about the words that would get you and me banned from social media, words from your book. Let's end up with some more words, some positive words from your book that I think would get us banned from social media and denounced as haters on campus. The words are the following: sex has meaning. Our bodies were created in a certain way for a certain purpose. Marriage is a safe haven for raising children. Men and women are unique in their differences. Fertility is a gift, not a disease. Surely, Dr. Morse, we can't build a civilization on these wacky novelties, can we?
Well, as you pointed out before, these are the things that are based in reality and based in truth. And the real question, and I think most of your listeners recognize those things as true and have some desire for them. In every human heart, there is a desire for reliable love. That's the thing. There's a desire, a deep longing for reliable love, and all of these things go against that, you know. So that's what we have to tap into, is a desire for reliable love, and we have to tap into the wealth of stories like your first caller had of people who have been there, done that, and can live to tell the tale and explain to people, hey, you're not getting the whole story. That's propaganda you're seeing on your TV sitcoms and in Hollywood. That's not the whole story. And you know,
not every casualty of the sexual revolution lived to tell the tale.
Indeed.
And that's, you know, whether it's you know, the victims of the abortion culture or those who lost their lives through sexually transmitted infections or the culture of domestic abuse and violence. The sexual revolution has a pretty high body count. Where do we go from here, Dr. Morse?
Well, in the last chapter of the book, I have a 15-point manifesto for the family. And the first 10 points are all things that the government needs to stop doing, things the government never had any business doing. So our libertarian friends who don't want the government to boss us around, I'm telling you, the government's already bossing you around. You just don't realize it. You know, really, so the very first one is end sex education in the schools. You know, for crying out loud, when did it become the government's business to teach fourth graders how to put condoms on bananas?
I just heard heads explode all around the country. The very idea.
Well, but you see, the thing is, once you have in your mind the idea that sex is an entitlement and we're going to make it so people can do whatever they want, then you have to start working on people at a really young age to convince them to use a condom every time. Now, why you think teenagers are going to use a condom every single time, why that's realistic, but abstinence is not realistic, no one has ever been able to explain that to me, Father. I don't get it, you know?
Right.
But in any case, that is your tax dollars at work. And the fact that sex education in the schools has become so accepted, that's now the vehicle through which the latest manifestations of the gender ideology are entering the schools. That's why we have kindergartners being told that they can be a boy or a girl, whatever they want to be.
Or why we have drag performers in public libraries for story time for 4-year-olds.
Indeed. That's how this is all coming about. So there are a number of things that the government needs to stop doing that it is currently doing, and that's what I talk about in the book, The Sexual State. But I do believe that the Catholic faithful, I don't believe in liberal Catholics or conservative Catholics. I just call us catechism Catholics. People who believe in the catechism. I don't care who you're voting for. If you believe in the catechism, we as Catholics have a uniquely important and valuable role to play, because we're the only ones who are going to say, look, the whole thing was a big wrong turn, and there's life on the other side of the line. If we are to if we turn back, we're not all going to die. If we turn back, we're going to have a better life. Everybody's going to have a better life. And we're really the only people who can testify to that in a consistent and coherent manner. I have a lot of non-Catholic followers, a lot of Mormons, a lot of evangelicals, who are very interested in our work because they're very upset about a lot of things we're upset about too.
Sure.
And very often, Father, they're looking to us for explanation, for depth, for research, for the philosophical grounding, to explain why these things have no chance of working.
Right. Orthodox Catholics have a very, very long history of reflection on the most important questions regarding human life and human purposes and human relations. And, a lot of my brother clergy bandy about the word the pastoral approach, which usually means a wink and a nod and a turning away from what the moral law requires. The real pastoral approach is to tell the truth and then offer people Christian fellowship and the grace of the sacraments to live the truth even when that truth is hard. And I think that's another step. That we not only need to get the government out of people's business, but we also need to have we need to have the people of the church to live more like the bride of Christ she was always meant to be.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And honestly, in a peculiar way, the recent revelations of clergy sexual abuse are a good thing. Given that it was going on, it's better that it be revealed than that it continue to be hidden. The fact that it's being revealed means that we can deal with it, means that we can be helpful to the people who need to be helped, and I think it's time to do that. And the Ruth Institute is absolutely committed to hanging in there on the issues of surrounding clergy sexual abuse. And in fact, Father, I've been telling people, when I wrote this book, in this subtitle, Why the Church Was Right All Along, the book came out in August, and right around that time, Cardinal McCarrick had to be no longer cardinal, demoted, whatever that word is, because that's not a very common thing. They tore up his membership card. Yeah. He had to cash in his red beanie. It's kind of an unfortunate subtitle, right? But no, the church's teaching has been right all along. The people who are not living the church's teaching, but who are occupying positions of power and authority within the church, they're doing a lot of harm on multiple levels. And now that it's being revealed, we can do something about it. So I've been telling people, we have a regular newsletter, and I write all the time. I'm at the National Catholic Register and whatnot. And I've been telling people, look, if you really want to help the church, you need to insist on two things. Number one, we want justice for clerical sex abuse. Meaning we are not going to hide it just because it's our favorite priest or we love Father so-and-so. No. We want to punish the guilty, we want to protect the innocent, and we want to have restoration for the victims. That's justice. That's what justice is, and we want that. That's point one. But the second point, equally important, we, as Catechism Catholic laity, we must proclaim the fullness of truth about human sexuality and marriage and family. All the things the church has held counterculturally since the beginning of the church 2,000 years ago. This was never popular, right? It was always a problem, right? Jesus freaked out the apostles when he told them no remarriage after divorce. It's been tough for a long time, right? But it's the truth, and the laity need to proclaim it, because if we don't, it's not going to get done. And that's the
business as
antidote to
usual has to end, and we clergy need to do our part, and the laity need to do their part as well. And then we have to invoke the intercession of the saints, something to think about on the Feast of All Saints. I wanted to thank our guest today, Dr. Morse from the Ruth Institute, author of a very important book that I highly recommend to you, The Sexual State: How Elite Ideologies Are Destroying Lives and Why the Church was Right All Along.
You've just been listening to Dr. J talking with Father Robert McTeigue on the Station of the Crosses, The Catholic Current. They're discussing the fallout and the underpinning ideologies of the sexual revolution. Check out Dr. J's newest book, The Sexual State, over at ruthinstitute.org or thesexualstate.com. The Ruth Institute is a non-profit educational organization equipping effective advocates for family stability and love, both at home and in the public square. Our podcasts can be found online at ruthinstitute.org and iTunes, and as always, they're under a Creative Commons license. If you've enjoyed them, please share them with friends. Like us on Facebook, check out the site, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter to stay informed.